It was supposed to be a regular Sunday morning, but then the doorbell rang. I never thought I'd see him again. My Edward Monroe, standing there after 15 years of silence. I opened the door, expecting an apology, maybe even an explanation. But no. Instead, he asked me to give him my bungalow. The bungalow I built from nothing. The bungalow I worked 80-hour weeks for. And who was he asking for it? My Samantha Blake. The same family who turned their back on me at 16. Have you ever felt like your own family was trying to take what you worked so hard for? Have you ever fought for something, only to have it taken from you by those who don't understand your struggle? If you've ever had to stand up to family who's taken you for granted, this story is for you. Let me take you back to that moment. It was a Sunday, like any other. I was sipping coffee on my patio, looking out at the yard I had spent hours designing. The morning sun peeked through the trees, warming the maple floors of my 3-bedroom Tudor bungalow. This bungalow wasn't just a place to live, it was my triumph. Every inch of it was a reminder of what I'd fought for since I was 16. And in that moment, as I stared at my Edward Monroe on the doorstep, I felt like everything I'd built was suddenly at risk. At 16, I was kicked out, alone, with nothing but a backpack and the clothes on my back. But I wasn't going to let that be my story. I rebuilt my life from the ground up. I worked relentlessly, climbed the ranks from receptionist to real estate agent, and eventually built my own agency. Fast forward 15 years, and now I'm one of the top realtors in the area, closing over $15 million in sales a year. But more than the money, it's the independence. My success has given me a life I'm proud of, a life I fought for every single day. And then, there he was, standing in front of me, asking for everything I had. The betrayal was unbearable. But I wasn't about to let him or anyone else take what was mine. I had worked too hard for this. I wasn't going to let the same people who abandoned me take everything I'd fought to build. So, what did I do? That's where things get interesting. Stay tuned to hear how this story unfolded. We found each other at the local shelter, and his loyal companionship has been a constant source of comfort through some lonely nights. My chosen family has been equally important to my healing. Sarah, my best friend since 7th grade, has been my rock. When everyone else disappeared, her family took me in until I graduated high school. We still have dinner together every Wednesday, a tradition that has survived boyfriends, her marriage, and the birth of her 2 children who call me Auntie Nat. Then there is Kevin, my mentor in real estate, who saw potential in me when I was just a broke 19-year-old serving him coffee. His guidance helped me navigate the business world when I had no role models to follow. My therapist, Dr. Winters, deserves credit, too. For 6 years, I worked through the abandonment issues and learned to trust again. The journey hasn't been easy. There were panic attacks in the early years, nights spent questioning my worth, and a persistent fear that everything I built could disappear in an instant. Through therapy, I learned that my hypervigilance and perfectionism were armor I built to protect myself after my Edward Monroe's betrayal. Dating has been complicated. I've had a few serious relationships, but my independence is something I guard fiercely. My last boyfriend couldn't understand why I refused to add his name to anything I owned, even after 2 years together. He called me untrusting. Maybe I am. But when you have had everything taken away once, you learn to protect what you rebuild. My community involvement has become another source of strength. I volunteer at a shelter for teens who have been displaced from their homes, understanding their situation better than most. Twice a month, I teach financial literacy workshops, helping these young people understand how to build credit, save money, and eventually become homeowners themselves. Giving back helps me make sense of my own journey. The stability of my routine grounds me. A mug of coffee trembles in Leila Monroe's hand as her Edward Monroe stands on the patio, the early sunlight slicing awkward shadows across the old, graying wood. Every detail, the soft hum of her neighbors, the distant laughter of friends inside, feels suddenly off. Riley Thompson, her loyal golden retriever, swirls at her feet like an unspoken question. Before Leila can ask why he's here, her Edward Monroe drops a bombshell. He never left because of her, but because Samantha, her Samantha Blake, forced him. The betrayal isn't just a wound, it's a trap. The air hums as everything Leila believed in crumbles. How could this happen? Why is everything she built being torn apart by the very people she trusted? Leila's world has been carefully crafted, a routine built on stability and independence. Sunday brunches on her patio, Monday strategy meetings with her real estate team, Wednesday dinners with Sarah and her family. This is her safe place, a sanctuary from the chaos of her past. But when the doorbell rang that Sunday morning, she had no idea the ghosts from her past would come knocking, shattering her peace. Before the betrayal, life seemed perfect. Her mom, Eleanor, with her infectious laugh, and her dad, Thomas, a steady, patient figure, made her feel loved and protected. Their small bungalow on a tree-lined avenue was filled with love, laughter, and the smell of freshly baked cookies. It was a happy childhood, the kind Leila swore she would one day build for herself. But then, at just 10 years old, the diagnosis came. Mom's breast cancer was aggressive, and the next 8 months blurred into hospital visits and sterile, antiseptic smells. Despite the pain, her mom focused on making memories. Letters for Leila's future milestones, recordings of her favorite books, gifts she'd never lived to see her daughter use. She died on a Tuesday in April, and Leila's heart shattered. She remembers the cherry blossoms blooming outside the hospital window as her Edward Monroe held her mom's hand on one side and Leila held it on the other. The loss changed everything. And just when Leila thought she was beginning to rebuild, her Edward Monroe's sudden reappearance rips open old wounds. Could the love and stability she thought she had really have been a lie all along? Why does Samantha always seem to get what she wants, leaving Leila with nothing but the ruins of a broken family? Leila's story is one of resilience, independence, and the fight to prove her worth. But as she faces the ghosts of her past, her Edward Monroe's betrayal, her Samantha Blake's entitlement, can she protect what she's built? Will she be able to maintain her hard-won independence in a world that seems to be trying to pull her back into the chaos of her past? Only time will tell. The faint scent of burnt pancakes still lingers in the air. It's almost dinner time, but the weight of 1,000 unspoken words hangs between us. I sit on the old porch swing, the creaking wood beneath me matching the unrest inside. As I trace the fading light across the family photos on the table, everything feels fragile. How much longer can I hold on to what's mine before someone else takes it? Riley Thompson sits by my feet, his comforting presence like a steady anchor. But there's something else in the bungalow. A shadow. Samantha's voice drifts through the hallway, cold and calculated. My fingers tighten on the edge of the table. Dad's absence looms just as much as her presence. How far am I willing to go to protect what's left? My independence? My memories? Her last words to me echo in my mind. Find joy, Leila Monroe, even when it seems impossible. It's what Mom wanted, what she believed in, before she left. But now, after everything I've fought for, everything I've built, it feels like it's all slipping away. For a while, it was just me and Dad, grieving, rebuilding, finding moments of peace in the chaos. Sundays spent in the kitchen making pancakes that always ended in laughter, hiking trips where we found the quiet we needed. But nothing lasts forever. When I was 12, Dad started going out in the evenings. He was lonely, and I knew it. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that his loneliness would lead him back into a world of secrets and betrayals. And with Samantha, the one thing that's always been clear is that she's only interested in what she can take. So, what do I do now? How much am I willing to lose for the sake of protecting what's left of me? Leila Monroe sits beneath the warm glow of morning light in her gourmet kitchen. the sweet scent of Diane's apple pie mingling with the sour notes of hidden truths. Her eyes drift to the bookshelf, but it's not the shiny awards that catch her attention. It's the dusty family photo tucked behind them. And then she catches the glimmer in Samantha Blake's eyes. It's not curiosity about the award. It's something darker, more invasive. Riley Thompson. Thompson shifts quietly beside her, his loyal presence a comfort amidst the rising tension. The moment hangs in the air, like the calm before a storm, until Samantha speaks. "Have you ever met your Edward Monroe before?" she asks, icy and casual, as though she's unloading a bombshell. The room goes eerily still. The pie sits untouched, its sweetness fading into a chilling backdrop. Every word becomes a question, every glance a challenge. Could Samantha's motives be more layered than they seem? With her entitlement and calculated demeanor, the stakes skyrocket. Who does she really think she is? Feeling the heat rise in her chest, Leila clenches her fists, grappling with the impending threat to everything she has fought for. Her memories, her Edward Monroe's laughter, her freedom, are like fragile glass, trembling on the edge of disaster. Flashback. When she was 12, her Edward Monroe's world shifted. The Sundays spent making pancakes now feel like a distant dream, a stark contrast to the loneliness that crept in when he sought comfort in new arms, seeking solace in Diane, unaware of the chaos it would sow within their once stable lives. "Sweetheart," he said one Sunday, hope painting his features, "Diane has a daughter about your age. Her name is Samantha Blake. Do you think you'll be friends?" Leila wanted to believe it would be fine, but it didn't take long for that naivety to dwindle. Soon after, Diane and her daughter arrived, the aroma of fresh pie wafting through the door. "This is my daughter, Leila. Isn't she charming?" But there was something about Samantha Blake, a guardedness, a distance that chilled Leila's heart. As the initial awkwardness faded, Samantha's words seeped in, sharp and stinging. "Your dad makes good money, right? I guess he works really hard." In that moment, alarm bells rang out like distant thunder. But Leila? She was oblivious, caught in the web of her Edward Monroe's dreams and the counterfeit warmth of a new family. Samantha's interest was more than just idle curiosity. It was a strategy, a carefully plotted move in a game Leila never signed up for. And now the question lingers in the air. How far will Leila have to go to protect the life she's built from the shadows of betrayal? Time will tell, but she won't go down without a fight. Leila Monroe stood frozen in the doorway, her nostrils pricking with the sharp scent of Diane's rose perfume as the sound of boxes echoed through the hallway. She could almost feel the weight of her Edward Monroe's new life settling into their bungalow, the same bungalow she'd fought so hard to make her own. The blue dress scratched her neck, the tight fabric pulling at memories of Samantha Blake's sneer and the echo of clinking glasses during their rushed wedding. Everything had changed. Her Edward Monroe's laughter now belonged to someone else, and their once vibrant Sundays had been replaced by quiet, distant brunches. It wasn't just the furniture rearranged or the pictures disappearing from the walls. It was the slow, subtle shift in loyalties that felt like a storm brewing on the horizon. And for Leila, it was the worst kind of betrayal, the kind that takes your family and makes it someone else's. Flashback. She remembers when her Edward Monroe first introduced Diane, his eyes bright with hope. "Sweetheart, Diane has a daughter about your age. Her name is Samantha Blake. Do you think you'll be friends?" Leila had wanted to believe him, to trust in this new family, but the moment Samantha Blake spoke, cold and distant, something clicked. "My mom always gets what she wants. Always." The words stung. Things grew colder after their honeymoon. Diane and Samantha Blake moved in, but it wasn't just about the boxes of new belongings crowding their space. It was about the little things: Mom's chair in the basement, pictures vanishing, and a constant feeling that Samantha Blake was always the priority. Leila worked harder, did more chores, But somehow, Samantha Blake's asthma was always the reason she got a free pass. Leila's Edward Monroe, her rock, was always busy, always distracted by his new family. "I don't think you understand," Diane would say. "Samantha Blake needs more attention right now. The divorce was hard on her. You're so independent, Leila. That's why we love you." But what they loved, what they truly valued, was her ability to disappear, to handle everything on her own while they lived their perfect new life. So Leila fought. She fought for her bungalow, for the life she'd built, for her Edward Monroe, because if she didn't, who would? Leila Monroe stood in the hallway, the soft light from Samantha Blake's room spilling across the floor. Her fists clenched around the torn book, the last gift from her mom, as muted laughter echoed from the kitchen. Samantha Blake and Diane, still lingering there, were oblivious to the tension rising in Leila's chest. The scent of old wood, mixed with the faint buzz of their conversation, made her stomach churn. It wasn't supposed to be this way. This bungalow, the one she fought for, was being swallowed up, piece by a family that didn't belong. The memory of her Edward Monroe's new life still burned in her veins, a constant reminder that her hard work, her independence, meant nothing. Her Edward Monroe's laughter, his affection, had all shifted toward someone else. Leila had given everything to this place, only to be replaced by a woman and a daughter who had never understood what it was to fight for something. As her heart raced, Riley Thompson, her loyal dog, nudged her leg. For a split second, Leila wasn't alone. She wasn't forgotten. But then, the phone rang. Her Edward Monroe's voice was tight with concern, asking, "Did you notice anything missing?" Leila paused, the air thick with the weight of his question. What was she supposed to say? What had she missed? And how far would Samantha Blake go this time? Independence had always been a double-edged sword for Leila. The more she handled things on her own, the more her Edward Monroe and Diane ignored her. Samantha Blake? She was the star, always in need of attention, always the priority. Leila's events were forgotten, and her Edward Monroe never showed. Diane always had an excuse, always placing Samantha Blake's needs above Leila's. Then came the small things. Money gone from her desk drawer, a page ripped from her mother's book, her school project ruined just before it was due. When Leila spoke up, Diane dismissed it with a sigh. "Teenagers," she'd say, "always dramatic." Samantha Blake? She played the part of a sister when their dad was around, suggesting movies, offering to braid her hair. But the moment he left, the gloves came off. "He only cares because your mom's dead," Samantha Blake told her once, her voice cold. "That's the only reason he even looks at you." Leila tried telling her dad, but he waved it off. "Give her time, Leila. It's new for everyone." But it wasn't just jealousy. It was gaslighting, making Leila question her own sanity. Items would disappear, only to show up in her backpack. Conversations would be denied. "We never said you could go to Sarah's." "You must have dreamed it," Diane would say, and her Edward Monroe would just stare, confused. Despite everything, Leila kept her grades up, focusing on school as her escape. But she knew it was more than that. It was her ticket to freedom, to proving that she was more than just the girl who'd been left behind. She kept a journal hidden under her mattress, her only lifeline in a bungalow that felt less like bungalow every day. Evening drizzle tapped against the window, wrapping the bungalow in an intimate veil of sound. Leila Monroe sat clutching her phone, pulse racing from Sarah's warning. The scent of rain mixed with the tension in the room, each shadow on the wall signaling another betrayal waiting to happen. The distant echo of her Edward Monroe, Edward, drifted down the hallway, muffled by Diane's laughter. Leila's heart tightened. Could her last attempt to break through finally pierce the fog? Or would Samantha Blake seize her chance as Leila hesitated, the weight of consequence hanging thick in the air? Sarah had become Leila's lifeline, the one person who truly understood her family dynamic. "Your stepmom is manipulative," Sarah noted after an afternoon at their bungalow. "The way she acts when your dad is around versus when he's not is seriously messed up." By the time Leila turned 16, Bungalow had twisted from sanctuary into a battleground where she was constantly on the defensive. Every word felt like walking on eggshells, trying to avoid giving Diane or Samantha any ammunition to use against her. Edward had transformed into a shadow of the man he once was, barely seeing the chaos unfolding before him. Leila's love for him was unwavering. She devised ways to reconnect, leaving notes in his lunch like her mom used to, or asking about his day in those rare, quiet moments. Yet those glimpses of their old bond were fleeting, always interrupted by Diane's demands or Samantha's insatiable need for attention. While holding on to hope that her Edward Monroe would eventually see through the manipulation, everything came to a catastrophic head that fateful autumn evening. After a long study session with her advanced placement chemistry group, Leila returned Bungalow to find her life about to implode. The evening began ordinarily enough. Sarah's mom dropped her off around 8:30 p.m. But once she stepped inside, an unsettling tension filled the air. Edward sat at the kitchen table, his face drawn tight with anger, a look she rarely saw. Diane loomed beside him, her hand possessively on his shoulder. Samantha hung in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression flickering between nervousness and an unsettling satisfaction. "Where have you been?" Edward demanded, voice strained. "At the library with my study group," Leila replied, feeling the weight of a storm brewing. The exchange was heavy, filled with unspoken truths and simmering emotions. This was no ordinary family disagreement. It was a clash of independence against entitlement, a battle for recognition waged in the confines of their bungalow. As the evening wore on, Leila felt the walls closing in, the air thick with unvoiced fears. Would she finally stand up to Diane and Samantha, or would she lose everything she fought so hard to achieve? Time seemed to stretch as the tension mounted, every second teetering between two potential futures, one where Leila reclaimed her autonomy and another where she succumbed to the shadows cast by her family's betrayal. "I told you this morning, and Mrs. Parker just dropped me off," I replied, confusion growing. I had followed all the rules, even texting when we decided to stay an extra hour. "We need to talk about what we found in your room," Diane said, her voice carrying a rehearsed quality. My stomach dropped. "You were in my room. Why?" "Don't change the subject," Dad snapped. "Diane was putting away laundry and noticed your drawer wasn't closing properly." This was the first red flag. Diane had never put away my laundry. That had always been my responsibility since she moved in. When I tried to fix it, Diane continued smoothly. "I found something very disturbing." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small wad of cash, fanning out several hundred bills on the table. $2,000 in total, I would later learn. "Recognize this?" she asked. I shook my head. "Number? That's not mine." "It was hidden under your socks," Diane countered. "And, coincidentally, it's exactly the amount that's missing from my purse. The money I withdrew yesterday for Samantha Blake's school ski trip." My mind raced. I'd never seen that money before. I'd never taken anything from Diane or anyone else. "I didn't take it," I said firmly. "I've been at school and then the library all day." "You could have taken it any time yesterday or this morning," Diane replied. "You knew I got the cash for Samantha Blake's trip. You were there when I mentioned it at breakfast." I looked at Dad, expecting him to at least consider that I might be telling the truth. Instead, I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen directed at me before. Distrust. "We also found this," he said quietly, pushing a small gold bracelet across the table. My breath caught. It was Diane's bracelet, one she often complained about losing and finding again. I had seen her wearing it just days ago. "That's not mine either," I said, my voice rising with panic. "Dad, you know I wouldn't steal. You know me." "I thought I did," he replied. Leila Monroe's heartbeat thudded in her chest, each pulse louder than the storm raging inside her. The room felt smaller, suffocating. Diane's notebook slammed shut, the sound like a gavel sealing her fate. Samantha Blake's eyes bored into Leila, pity, triumph, and something colder behind them. And there, across the table, her Edward Monroe. Edward Monroe stared at her with nothing but disappointment in his eyes. Riley Thompson. Thompson, her best friend, stood beside her, his hands shaking, struggling to find the words to comfort her. But in the silence that followed, none of them seemed to believe her anymore. Diane leaned forward, lips parting to unleash something that would destroy her even more. What could it possibly be? More lies? More accusations? The tears were right there, just waiting to spill, but Leila wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "I didn't do it," she said, her voice cracking but her resolve steely. "Please, you know me. You have to believe me." But her Edward Monroe's gaze never wavered, and the sting of his words left a scar deeper than any accusation. "I've tried to be patient with you, Leila, but this is too far. You've gone too far." Her world was crumbling, right there in the kitchen where she'd grown up, surrounded by the family she thought she could trust. How could they do this to her? Was the truth even enough anymore? Then the ultimatum came. Admit it, apologize, and return everything or get out. Leila's heart sank. No. No way. You can't be serious. "Dead serious," her Edward Monroe replied, his voice cold. And just like that, everything she worked for, her independence, her dignity, her future, was on the line. Would she surrender to save her family? Or would she stand her ground, even if it meant losing everything? "Not that you care," Leila Monroe thought as she stood at the threshold of her shattered world. But there was her Edward Monroe. Edward Monroe, flanked by his new wife, Diane. "You've made your choice," Diane said, her voice a cold, resolute order. The weight of betrayal settled into Leila's chest. "Mom would be ashamed of you right now," she shot back, fueled by a desperate need to voice her truth. As the door slammed behind her, Leila stepped out into the rain, each droplet striking like a judgment. That porch, her bungalow for years, now felt like a prison. She waited, drenched and trembling, for Sarah's parents to arrive. When she collapsed in Sarah's room that night, she cried until the tears ran dry, her heart breaking under the weight of what had been lost. Sarah's parents offered refuge, but their concern carried the unspoken truth. This was not a temporary escape. Something fundamental had shifted, and there was no going back. Days turned into blur, punctured by whispers in the school hallway. "Have you heard? Leila got kicked out." By the end of the week, she felt like a ghost haunting her own life. Even the guidance counselor's well-meaning talk about her options felt hollow, devoid of the solace she so desperately sought. Would anyone ever truly understand? Should she fight for the love of a Edward Monroe who had turned his back? Just when the gravity of her abandonment became suffocating, a package appeared on Sarah's doorstep. Inside were remnants of her life, stuffed in without care. At the bottom lay a stark note in her Edward Monroe's handwriting. "When you're ready to admit what you did and apologize, we can discuss you coming. Bungalow." The accusation stung. No recognition of his betrayal, just more doubt heaped on the pile of guilt he'd pinned on her. With steady hands, she folded the note and tucked it neatly into her mother's memory box. There, nestled beside irreplaceable mementos, was a bank statement she had unearthed during her hurried packing. It showed Diane's withdrawal of precisely $2,000, the very amount that had landed her in this quagmire. Evidence collected in shadows, the truth waited patiently, knowing its moment in the sun would come. Leila gazed out the window, feeling the rain's patter mimic the chaos churning within. Would she ever reclaim her independence? Or was she destined to remain a pawn in someone else's game? The months after my expulsion from Bungalow hit me like a tidal wave. I found myself in a world no longer sheltered, where every choice mattered. Sarah's parents, John and Margaret Parker, didn't just open their doors, they saved me. They turned their bungalow office into a bedroom just for me, a refuge from the chaos outside. "You can stay with us through graduation," John assured, his voice steady. "We've consulted a lawyer. Your dad hasn't legally abandoned you yet, since he's still sending checks." It was a backhanded support, a lifeline laced with indifference. He hadn't called or even visited, just a lifeless check each month, a way to avoid the legal firestorm of his own making. Diane, his new partner, convinced him that I needed tough love, a term that rang hollow in my ears. I had trusted him blindly, and now it felt like a cruel joke. Who was truly abandoning whom? Fueled by the betrayal, I stepped up my game at school. Education wasn't just important anymore, it was my only shot at freedom. I poured my soul into my studies, grinding through assignments while working 20 hours a week at a local cafe just to add something to the Parker household inventory. "Your personal essay about overcoming adversity is one of the most powerful I've ever read," my guidance counselor told me one day, her eyes glistening with approval. "Colleges will recognize your resilience," she proclaimed, as if conjuring the magic I desperately needed. Then came graduation day, a mixed bag of pride and pain. I had aced it, 4 substantial scholarships to the state university. Yet a gaping hole ached in my chest. My Edward Monroe was nowhere to be seen. I had sent him an invitation despite everyone's warnings. No response, just emptiness. But I wasn't alone. As I stepped onto that stage, I had the Parkers, Sarah, and my teachers cheering, their smiles lifting me higher than his absence weighed me down. That summer, a tiny apartment awaited. I partnered with Jessica, another scholarship warrior. We were 18 and on the verge of our adult lives. Would this be my moment of independence, or just a setting for more betrayal from the family I once trusted? Little did I know, my life was about to take another unexpected turn. A text from Samantha Blake lit up my phone. "Have you decided about the bungalow?" I felt the weight of that question tearing through the excitement of my new beginnings, leaving me caught between freedom and the ghosts of my past. The unanswered question lingered like a storm cloud, heavy as dusk settled around me. Was this uneasy truce security, or just a new kind of betrayal? Steam from old vents mingles with the scent of burnt coffee, stinging Leila Monroe's eyes as she flips over the card. Kevin Reynolds' real estate logo overlaps with Samantha Blake's last name. Everything falls into place, but it doesn't feel like the right kind of alignment. Every easy conversation, every friendly exchange at the cafe, now feels like a setup. Leila's chest tightens. Did Samantha orchestrate this perfect job offer all along? Riley Thompson whimpers by her side, sensing her panic. The walls of the cafe feel thinner than ever as doubt floods her thoughts. Can she trust anyone? The place was shabby, unreliable heating, paper-thin walls. But it was the first space that was truly hers. 2 jobs, every penny saved. Textbooks, tuition, expenses the scholarships couldn't cover. It was at one of those jobs, serving coffee at a local cafe, that Leila met Kevin Reynolds. Regular customer, same order, every time. A large black coffee, blueberry muffin, always with an easy smile. "You look exhausted today," he remarked one morning, noticing her haggard face after a sleepless night finishing a paper. "College student. That obvious?" Leila forced a tired smile. "I've seen the look before," he chuckled. "Business major?" "Finance minor," she answered, grateful for the distraction. "Smart combo," he said before handing her a business card. "My office needs a part-time receptionist. Better pay, regular hours. Think about it." That card, that one gesture, changed everything. Leila didn't just answer phones at Reynolds Realty. Kevin took her under his wing, teaching her the business from the ground up. 6 months in, after overhearing her talk to a walk-in client, he smiled and said, You've got a natural talent for this. You listen well, and you know how to match people to properties." By junior year, Leila was working nearly full-time at the agency while juggling classes. Kevin encouraged her to get her real estate license, even paying for the courses. "It's an investment," he said. "You'll pay me back by bringing in clients." She passed her licensing exam on the first try, then sold her first bungalow just 2 months later. A starter bungalow for a young couple not much older than herself. But now, with a simple card in hand, the reality of her success felt like a trap. Was this new offer just another push from the shadows of her past? Was Samantha really the one pulling all the strings? The game had changed, and Leila wasn't sure who was playing her anymore. The scent of fresh paint lingered in the air as Leila Monroe dragged her box across the empty living room. Each step sent a shiver through her bare feet on the carpet, a reminder of the vacant space where her life was about to begin anew. The echoing silence turned her thoughts inward, recalling a time when she was much younger, curled up on her Edward Monroe's couch, caught in the snare of his clipped transactional words. Back then, the ache in her chest mingled with the scent of stale coffee and disappointment. Yet now, with the contract trembling in her hands, the room pulsed with fierce potential, an unwavering promise of independence. Could she finally reclaim what was rightfully hers? The commission she earned was unprecedented, enough to escape her shabby apartment for a cozy one-bedroom of her own, a sanctuary. The weight of minimal contact with her Edward Monroe lifted, though she kept hearing murmurs about Diane and Samantha Blake. Could her Samantha Blake really have been the one pulling strings all along? At just 23, Leila made the boldest decision of her life. Using her savings and a first-time homebuyer program, she bought a small, outdated bungalow that cried for love and attention. Yet the moment she signed those papers, something remarkable shifted within her. She had a bungalow, a place no one could snatch away. You realize you own property before most of your college professors, right? Kevin Reynolds chuckled as they celebrated with cheap champagne in plastic cups. Sitting on the floor of her empty living room, he smiled, pride beaming in his eyes. "I'm just getting started," she replied, determination lighting her voice. For the next 7 years, those words propelled her through a whirlwind of 18-hour days, building a reputation as a formidable force in real estate. She expanded into commercial properties, devoured market trends, and poured her earnings back into her dreams. When Kevin, who became more than just a boss, decided to retire, he handed her an opportunity, an agency. "You've run it in all but name these past 2 years," he said. "It's yours." At 29, Leila Monroe became the proud owner of Parker Reynolds Realty. The very name honored her mentor and the family that had lifted her from despair. Under her leadership, the agency thrived, expanding from 3 agents to 8, guided by ethical practices that fostered loyalty among clients. Yet amidst professional triumph, her personal healing lagged, clawing for recognition in the shadows of family strife. Unsure of what Samantha was scheming, Leila couldn't shake the feeling that her Samantha Blake was watching, waiting for the moment to strike. Would she challenge Leila's hard-earned success? The tension shadowed every deal, every achievement. But deep down, Leila held on to one fierce notion. She was determined to protect her independence and prove her worth, against all odds. Would the echoes of the past keep her tethered to doubt? Or would she rise, triumphant in her quest for self-worth amidst betrayal? Only time would tell. Weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Winters helped me process the abandonment and betrayal. "You've built extraordinary external success," she observed. "Now we need to work on believing you deserve it." The fear that everything could disappear remained my constant companion. I maintained emergency funds, backup plans for my backup plans, and struggled to fully trust romantic partners. My longest relationship lasted 2 years before falling apart over my reluctance to combine finances or consider joint property ownership. "I love you," Michael had said during our final argument, "but you keep part of yourself locked away. You're still living like someone might pull the rug out from under you at any moment." He wasn't wrong. The 16-year-old girl who had packed her life into a backpack and duffel bag still lived somewhere inside me, hyper-vigilant and waiting for the next betrayal. The purchase of my current bungalow at 30 was another milestone in my healing journey. The beautiful craftsman represented not just financial success, but a declaration that I was putting down roots, creating the stability I had lost. I spent months renovating it, making every detail exactly what I wanted. This was the bungalow I had dreamed of during those nights in Sarah's guest room and the shabby college apartment, a tangible manifestation of how far I had come. Through mutual connections, I occasionally heard updates about my Edward Monroe and his family. Dad had taken early retirement due to health issues. Samantha Blake had married young, had 2 children, and was now going through a messy divorce. Diane was as controlling as ever, now focusing her manipulations on Samantha Blake's children, her grandchildren. I made several attempts over the years to reconnect with Dad, motivated more by Dr. Winter's encouragement than my own desire. A card on his 60th birthday went unacknowledged. An email when I heard about his health problems received a "tour, I'm fine" in response. After all these years, I finally thought I was free from the weight of my Edward Monroe's decisions, free from the ghost of family ties that once defined me. I had built a life rooted in resilience and hard work, a life Samantha Blake, my Samantha Blake, could never understand. And yet, there I stood, unguarded in my kitchen when the doorbell rang, a call from the past that I never wanted. It was Sunday morning, and I was lost in the comforting aroma of my second cup of coffee, savoring the quiet. The bell chimed again, slicing through the stillness. Riley Thompson, my loyal mutt, barked, more of a welcome than a warning, his tail a blur of excitement. Visitors weren't uncommon in our close suburb, so I slipped on my best casual look, yoga pants and my alma mater's oversized sweatshirt, and padded barefoot to the door. But nothing could prepare me for the sight waiting on my porch. There stood Edward Monroe, the Edward Monroe who had become a mere shadow in my life, sharing space with Samantha Blake, no longer the bratty teenager but a woman scavenging confidence from her curated looks. She had the same calculating gaze that haunted my childhood, the same tight smile that held no warmth. "Leila," my Edward Monroe's voice emerged, rough and uncertain, coiling around my name like a forgotten promise. My heart hammered in my chest. Was this finally the moment he'd come to make amends? Or was this yet another chapter of disappointment? "Why are you here?" My words spilled out, raw and trembling. The room felt heavy, the sunlight casting a stark contrast on all they'd represented in my life. Did they even realize the upheaval they'd caused? Memories flooded back. The scent of vanilla cake on my 10th birthday, balloons brushing the ceiling while I basked in my Edward Monroe's pride. That warmth was gone, replaced by years of betrayal and silence. As I stood on the threshold, reality crashed down. Part of me wanted to embrace the familiar, while another part clung fiercely to my hard-earned independence. The stakes were higher than ever. Could I protect what I had built? Would they see me as the woman I had become, or merely as a daughter who had lost her way? What role would caged hopes play in my future if I let them in? I took a deep breath, the rain scent from outside mingling with the tension humming in the air. Whatever happened next would define the path forward. I managed to ask, not moving from the doorway. "Can we come in, please?" He shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the neighbor across the street who was walking her dog and watching our interaction with undisguised curiosity. Self-preservation told me to close the door to protect the life I had built from these people who had shattered my world once before. But curiosity won out. After 15 years, I wanted to know what could possibly have brought them to my door. 10 minutes, I said, stepping back to allow them entry. They walked into my bungalow, both of them taking in the hardwood floors, the tasteful furnishings, the obvious signs of financial comfort. Riley Thompson approached cautiously, sensing my attention. I rested my hand on his head, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Beautiful bungalow," Dad commented awkwardly, standing in my living room like a stranger, which I supposed he was. "Thank you. I worked hard for it." My voice was cooler than the morning air outside. "Why are you here?" Samantha Blake spoke for the first time. "You've done well for yourself." The undercurrent in her tone was familiar, that same resentment that had colored our teenage interactions. Some things hadn't changed again. "Why are you here?" I remained standing, not offering them seats or refreshments, not playing the role of hostess when they had forfeited any right to my hospitality years ago. Dad cleared his throat. "We heard about your success, your real estate company, this bungalow in this suburb," he trailed off, and I prompted. "And we wanted to reconnect," he finished unconvincingly. "After 15 years, try again." Samantha Blake stepped forward. "I'm going through a divorce." This information wasn't surprising. Through our one remaining mutual acquaintance, I had heard rumors of her marital problems months ago. "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, the polite response automatic rather than heartfelt. "It's been difficult," she continued, "especially for the kids. Jason is 7 and Emma is 5. I nodded, unsure where this was heading, but increasingly certain I wouldn't like the destination. "We had to move out of our bungalow," Samantha Blake added. "We're staying with Dad and Diane for now, but it's crowded. The kids are sharing a room that's really more of a converted office. Dad took over. We've been trying to help them get back on their feet. Samantha Blake's ex isn't reliable with child support, and she's trying to go back to school to get a degree. The pieces were starting to come together, but I still couldn't quite believe where this conversation seemed to be heading." "What does any of this have to do with me?" I asked directly. They exchanged glances before Dad spoke again. "We know you have this big bungalow. You live alone except for the dog, and Samantha Blake needs a stable place for the children." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline that never came. "Are you seriously here to ask me for money?" I finally asked. "Not money," Samantha Blake said quickly. "This bungalow. We thought maybe you could let us live here or even sign it over. You must have other properties through your business." The audacity stole my breath. 15 years of silence, of abandonment, and they had come to ask for my bungalow, the bungalow I had sacrificed and worked 80-hour weeks to afford. "You want me to give you my bungalow?" I repeated, certain I must have misunderstood. Dad at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Not give." "Exactly. Maybe you could move to a smaller place. You don't need all this space for just yourself. Samantha Blake has the children to consider." "And family should help family," Samantha Blake added with breathtaking hypocrisy. A laugh escaped me, sharp and disbelieving. "Family? Is that what we are?" "Blood is blood," Dad said quietly. "Despite everything." "Despite everything," I echoed. "Despite you throwing your 16-year-old daughter out of her bungalow over a lie." The air crackled with tension as Samantha hesitated, her composed exterior beginning to crumble. Leila's gaze pierced through the facade. Then her opponent's phone buzzed, urgency flashing in her eyes. She glanced at the screen, paling as demanding texts illuminated her cheeks. In that moment, everything shifted. Samantha wasn't just acting on her own accord. She was under pressure from someone Leila never saw coming. The depth of this betrayal twisted like a knife in her gut. As the rain began to patter softly outside, swirling the familiar scent of damp earth into the air, Leila stared at her family, her long-estranged Edward Monroe and Samantha Blake, who suddenly seemed like strangers. Years of absence when she needed them most flashed before her eyes. "What does any of this have to do with me?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. Dad's uncomfortable shuffle wasn't enough to hide his troubled spirit. "We know you have this big bungalow," he replied carefully. "You live alone, and Samantha needs a stable place for the kids." A tight knot formed in Leila's throat. Was this a joke? Are you seriously here to ask me for my bungalow? She could hardly process the audacity mirrored in their expressions. Not just the bungalow, Samantha piped up. Maybe you could sign it over since you've got other properties. The calmness of the downpour was ironic against her rising fury. 15 years of neglect, silent anniversaries of her loss, abandonment masked as family duty. You want me to give you my bungalow? Not give, Dad interjected. Maybe you could move somewhere smaller. With a dry laugh, Leila shot back, and what about Samantha's kids? You think that gives you a right to claim what I've built? Samantha's polite mask trembled. You've always been selfish. Selfish? Leila's voice pierced through the tension. I was homeless at 16 because of you. Samantha waved her hand dismissively, but Leila pressed on. This is my bungalow. I don't owe you anything, not after you chose to believe lies over me. The silence that enveloped them felt tangible, heavy with the weight of unspoken words. They were trapped in this raw confrontation, the storm outside seemingly mimicking the turmoil within her heart. Would they ever understand the stakes of their betrayal? Would the echoes of their choices resonate beyond this room? As the rain tapped insistently against the windows, Leila stood tall, determined to protect all she had earned against the betrayals of her past and prove once and for all that she was more than just a family name. Standing barefoot on the cool tile, Leila Monroe felt the silence envelop her. The only sound was her heartbeat, thudding in her ears like a distant war drum. A wave of nostalgia washed over her, pulling her back to the sun-soaked weekends of her childhood. She could almost smell the sweet, yeasty scent of the bread her mother used to bake, the laughter of family floating from the gourmet kitchen. But those memories cracked like fragile glass when darkness crept in. She remembered hurriedly packing her things, the weight of judgment from strangers thick in the air. Each clink of plates echoed with lost moments, while the muted scrape of her suitcase against the floor felt like a betrayal she couldn't shake off. Why had her family abandoned her? How could they drown in entitlement while she struggled for every inch of her autonomy? As the storm raged outside, Leila faced the very people who had turned their backs on her, her estranged Edward Monroe, and Samantha Blake, her Samantha Blake. They seemed like ghosts now, faceless reminders of what she lost. What does any of this have to do with me? She asked, her voice steady, yet laced with repressed anger. Edward shifted uncomfortably. We know you have this big bungalow, and Samantha needs a stable place for her kids. Leila's heart constricted. Was this a joke? Are you seriously here to ask for my bungalow? Samantha jumped in, her tone sharp. Not just the bungalow. Maybe you could sign it over since you've got other properties. A bitter laugh bubbled up in Leila. 15 years of neglect, anniversaries marked by silence. Now they had the audacity to call this family duty? You want me to give you my bungalow. Not give, Edward interjected cautiously. Maybe you could move somewhere smaller. Leila felt a wave of incredulity wash over her. What about Samantha's kids? She spat, her voice rising. You think that gives you a right to claim what I've built? Samantha's mask cracked as she hissed, You've always been so selfish. Selfish? Leila retorted, her words slicing through the tension. I was homeless at 16 because of you. Samantha waved her hand dismissively, but Leila pressed on. This is my bungalow. I don't owe you anything, not after you chose to ignore the truth. The silence was heavy, thick with unresolved grievances from a lifetime ago. You still believe the lies? She challenged, her voice low, dangerous. Edward's gaze dropped, unable to meet her eyes as he muttered that it was all water under the bridge. It matters to me, she insisted fiercely. It's why we're standing here after 15 years. It's why I had to build my life from scratch while you supported Samantha. Fine, Samantha snapped, frustration spilling out. Maybe I didn't steal the money. Maybe I moved it. Does that make you happy? Her bitterness ignited a fire within Leila. It all became clear. The doubt that had clouded her thoughts for so long dissipated. "It changes everything," she whispered, "but not in the way you think." Leila took a deep breath, grounding herself in the present moment. Riley Thompson stood beside her, her loyal companion, pressing against her leg like an anchor against the chaos of her past. How many ghosts would she have to face to reclaim her story? The room felt heavier with each passing second. Leila Monroe's hands trembled slightly as she placed the faded envelope on the coffee table. Riley's tail thumped against the floor, the only sound cutting through the thick silence. Samantha Blake's eyes flickered between Leila Monroe and their Edward Monroe, her lips tight with anticipation, but not the kind she'd expected. "What's this?" Edward asked, his voice tight. "Evidence," Leila Monroe replied, her tone steady, though her heart raced. "Evidence I've held on to for 15 years, waiting for this moment." She opened the envelope with calm precision, pulling out 2 crumpled papers. The first was an old bank statement, worn with age but clear enough to read. "This is from your joint account with Diane," she said, pointing to the date. "See the withdrawal? $2,000, the exact amount I was accused of stealing." Edward looked at the paper in confusion, his brow furrowing. "How did you get this?" "I found it the night you threw me out," Leila Monroe said, each word punctuated with an undeniable edge. "It was mixed in with my school papers, but I kept it. Thought I might need it one day." Then she laid the second document down, her fingers brushing the edges as if it weighed more than paper. "This," she said quietly, "is a transcript of a conversation I had with Samantha Blake 3 years after I left. She didn't know I was recording it." Samantha Blake's face went pale. "You recorded me?" she spat, her voice thick with rage. "That's illegal." "Actually, in this state," Leila Monroe countered coolly, "only one party needs to consent to the recording." She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "And frankly, after what you did to me, I'm not particularly concerned with your definition of right and wrong." Riley shifted beside her, sensing the tension in the room. Edward read the highlighted sections, his face draining of color. In Samantha Blake's own words, she had planted the money and the bracelet in Leila Monroe's room, then manipulated their mother into siding with her plan to rid herself of the competition. "Is this true?" Edward asked softly, his voice now hollow. Samantha Blake's defiance was all that remained, her head held high. "We were kids. I was jealous," she muttered, as if that could explain everything. But the damage had already been done. The weight of old secrets, once hidden in silence, now hung thick in the air. For the first time, Samantha Blake didn't look invincible. And for the first time, Leila Monroe's version of the story wasn't the only one left standing. "Mom said you always put Leila Monroe first, that we needed to break your attachment to her." The confirmation hung in the air between us. Dad sank onto my couch without invitation, suddenly looking every one of his 65 years. "Diane knew?" he asked, voice barely audible. "Of course she knew," Samantha Blake replied impatiently. "It was her idea." She said, "You were too blind when it came to your precious daughter." I watched my Edward Monroe absorb this information, the knowledge that he had been manipulated by his wife, that he had discarded his daughter over a deliberate lie. Part of me had imagined this moment for years, had fantasized about the satisfaction of seeing him face the truth. The reality was more complicated, a mixture of vindication and renewed grief for what we had lost. "All this time," he murmured. "All these years." "Yes," I said simply. "All these years." He looked up at me, eyes swimming with tears. "Leila Monroe, I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry." The apology I had waited 15 years to hear landed with surprising emptiness. It was too little, too late, a Band-Aid offered for an amputation. "Sorry doesn't rebuild what was destroyed," I said quietly. "Sorry doesn't give me back the years of having a Edward Monroe." "We can start over," he suggested, desperation edging his voice. "Now that I know the truth, Samantha Blake interrupted, her tone sharp. "This doesn't change our current situation. You can feel bad about the past all you want, Dad, but we still need a place to live. Leila Monroe still has this bungalow she doesn't need." Her persistent entitlement in the face of her exposed lies was almost impressive in its audacity. "You still don't get it," I told her. "This bungalow represents everything I built after you and your mother destroyed my life. Every brick, every floorboard was paid for with my sweat and determination. It is the physical manifestation of my survival, despite what you did to me." I turned to my Edward Monroe and you. You stand there and offer apologies as if words could possibly bridge the chasm between us. Where were you when I was struggling to find a place to live after high school? Where were you when I worked 2 jobs to put myself through college? Where were you for every birthday, every Christmas, every moment I achieved something and had no parent to share it with? Dad seemed to physically shrink under my questions, I thought. Diane convinced me that tough love was the only way to reach you, that you would admit what you'd done eventually. And when I didn't, when years passed and I maintained my innocence, did you ever once consider that maybe, just maybe, your daughter was telling the truth? He had no answer for that. Samantha Blake tried a different tactic. "Look, what happened was terrible. I admit that. We were awful to you, but my children are innocent in all this. They need a stable bungalow." "Then provide one for them," I replied, the way I had to provide for myself when I was hardly more than a child. "It's not that simple," she argued. "The job market is tough. Childcare is expensive. I'm well aware of the challenges." I cut her off. "I faced them alone at 16. You're 31 with family support. Figure it out." "So, you won't help at all?" Dad asked, a hint of the old authority creeping into his voice. "After everything I did for you growing up?" The audacity of his question left me momentarily speechless. "Everything you did for me?" I finally managed. "You mean fulfilling your basic legal obligation as a parent until I was 16 and then abandoning me? Should I be grateful for that bare minimum effort?" "I wasn't perfect," he conceded, "but I loved you. I still love you." The words I had once longed to hear now rang hollow. Love isn't a feeling, Dad. It's a series of actions. It's showing up. It's believing in your child. It's supporting them even when it's difficult. By any measurable standard, you stopped loving me the night you chose to believe I was a thief. Samantha Blake stood abruptly. The sun hung low, casting a warm glow on the cozy Tudor bungalow. In the yard, the scent of freshly cut grass mingled with the sweet notes of blooming flowers. But inside, something darker brewed, a storm of betrayal and unresolved hurt. Leila Monroe stood firm, heart racing. There she was, face to face with Samantha Blake, the Samantha Blake who turned family loyalty into a weapon. Leila took a deep breath. "You think this is about you?" she said, voice steady. "Let me make one thing clear. Not an inch of this bungalow will ever belong to you. It's mine, paid for with the sweat of my brow after you shattered my first life." Samantha's response was a bitter snarl. "You're just that same selfish girl, aren't you?" But Leila didn't flinch. "And you're still that entitled one, untouched by consequence." The biting words hung in the air like steam rising from the asphalt after a rainstorm, heavy with truth. Edward Monroe, Leila's Edward Monroe, shifted uneasily. The weight of his past hung over him, moments he'd rather forget, choices that caged his daughter in silence. "We can work through this now that I know the truth," he implored, desperation making his voice tremble. "The truth was always there," Leila interrupted, anger coursing through her veins. Heat surged through her as memories flickered back, sticky lemonade fingers on a sweltering July day, watching her Edward Monroe and Samantha laugh on the porch while she sat alone, her voice silenced. That day, the sting of invisibility became her armor. "You chose to ignore it. You chose Diane and Samantha over me again and again." He winced. "Can I at least have your number? Maybe we could talk when things are less emotional? The pleading in his eyes was a familiar echo, one she had longed for so badly before. But now, no. No, she replied firmly, cutting through the tension. For years, I reached out, trying to keep a connection. You ignored me then. I won't let you walk back in because it's convenient for you. As Leila ushered them toward the door, she felt the weight of her own resilience. She had built her life in the ashes of their betrayal, constructed her own family based on genuine support and love. Samantha stomped out first, spitting insults while Edward lingered, looking lost in the doorway of a daughter he barely knew. Leila felt a pang of what could have been, but it was swallowed by every achievement she had fought for. In the silence that followed, she embraced the scent of that sweet summer day, knowing she didn't need their acknowledgement to feel valued. She had proven her worth, not just to them, but to herself. You don't get to waltz back into my life when it's convenient for you or when you want something from me. I made a terrible mistake, he admitted. Yes, you did, and mistakes have consequences. This is yours. As he stepped onto the porch, he turned one last time. I really am sorry, Leila Monroe. I nodded, acknowledging his words without accepting them as enough. Goodbye, Dad. I closed the door, leaning against it as the sound of their car starting and driving away filtered through the windows. Riley Thompson nudged my hand with his nose. Sensitive to my distress, I slid down to sit on the floor, burying my face in his soft fur as 15 years of bottled emotions finally broke free. I cried for the 16-year-old girl in the rain, for the Edward Monroe I had lost, for the family we might have been in a world without Diane and Samantha Blake's manipulation. And finally, I cried in relief that the truth I had carried alone for so long had finally been spoken aloud. When the tears subsided, I called Sarah, who arrived 20 minutes later with coffee and unwavering support. We sat on my patio, the same place I had been peacefully enjoying my morning before my past came crashing back. "Are you okay?" she asked after I recounted the entire confrontation. "I think I will be," I replied honestly. It wasn't the closure I imagined, but maybe it was the closure I needed. I always thought vindication would feel better. "Vindication doesn't heal the original wound," she observed. "It just confirms you weren't crazy." We sat in comfortable silence, watching birds in the yard. "You know what's ironic?" I finally said after all these years of wondering if he would ever acknowledge the truth. "It turns out it doesn't really matter anymore. I built this life without him. His opinion stopped being essential to my happiness a long time ago." The following week, I made a substantial donation to the youth shelter where I volunteered, specifically earmarked for emergency housing for teens in crisis situations. I couldn't change my own past, but I could help create better outcomes for others facing similar circumstances. I also scheduled an extra session with Dr. Winters, working through the complex emotions the confrontation had stirred up. "You've come full circle," she noted. "How does it feel to have stood your ground?" "Empowering," I admitted. For so long, I was that scared teenager being thrown out of her bungalow. Facing them as an adult on my terms in my own bungalow shifted something fundamental in how I see myself in relation to them. Life settled back into its rhythm. My business continued to thrive. Riley Thompson and I took our morning runs. I had dinner with Sarah's family and movie nights with friends. Gradually, the confrontation with Dad and Samantha Blake took its place as just another event in my history. Significant, but no longer defining. 3 months later, a card arrived in the mail with a local postmark. Inside was a brief note from my Edward Monroe, including his phone number and an open invitation to call if I ever wanted to talk. No demands, no guilt, just an open door. I placed it in my desk drawer, neither accepting nor rejecting the possibility. The choice was mine now, and that made all the difference. My bungalow remained my sanctuary. Every corner filled with the life I had created for myself. Not a single inch would ever belong to those who had betrayed me, but every inch told the story of my resilience, my determination, and ultimately my triumph. Have you ever had to stand your ground against family members who took you for granted and then expected you to help them? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is say no to toxic people, even when they're family. Please like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe to hear more stories of overcoming adversity and share with someone who might need to be reminded of their own strength today. In the sunlit foyer of her bungalow, dust motes danced in the late afternoon glow, hinting at the warmth and history of bungalow. Leila Monroe stood strong, arms crossed, while tears softly traced her cheeks. "I will not let them take this away," she thought, her heart racing. Riley Thompson leaned against the door, a comforting presence, unspoken support radiating between them. Meanwhile, Samantha Blake tapped her fingers on her phone, the only sound marring the silence that hung heavy in the air. The clatter of keys echoed off the walls. Who would claim the bungalow? Leila gripped her future firmly. Every effort, every sleepless night had led her here. The scent of rain mingled with the familiar tang of pine as the conflict weighed down like heavy clouds. With each heartbeat, the pain of betrayal sharpened into clarity. What do you fight for when family turns against you? In that moment, Leila knew her worth, no longer a casualty of past wounds. But what about Riley? Could he fill the void of belonging she so desperately craved? As they faced this pivotal moment together, the stakes intensified, yet hope shimmered in the distance. With resolve, Leila stepped forward. "This is my bungalow," she declared, her voice steady despite the turmoil swirling inside. A deep breath. And suddenly, she saw it. Her dreams laid out before her like an open road, uncharted and brimming with possibilities. In that quiet confrontation, there was a shift. Leila reclaimed her story, her power, no longer defined by family betrayal, but shaped by resilience and drive. Would she stay rooted in her achievements or allow their shadows to linger? This was the moment that could define her forever. Have you ever faced a similar crossroads? When have you fought to reclaim your narrative from those who wronged you? Your stories matter, and together, let's explore the strength within them.